once you start hearing different perspectives on a story you thought you knew, other things start coming to light about other people and instances of discord and even instances of harmony that weren't what you thought they were. How does that contribute to who I am in the world now and who I want to be tomorrow?
Welcome to the Zami Nobla National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian herstory. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis.
My name is Sheree L. Greer, and I am a text-based artist born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, currently living in Tampa. I enjoy storytelling. I think that telling our stories and sharing our stories is probably one of the most powerful things that we can do. Much of my gratitude for my place and my part of this world is not only learning to love and share my own stories, but help other people, particularly Black queer people, own and love and share their stories too.
Thank you. We're so glad you're here visiting us in Atlanta for the Decatur Book Festival. And we've had a wonderful time with you earlier at the Zami Nobla brunch, where we had a chance to toast you. So it's great that you gave us your time today. Tell me a little bit about your name, the Kitchen Table Literary Arts, because it immediately reminded me of the Kitchen Table Press. Mm-hmm. And that historic opportunity for Black women to do their writing several years ago. But tell me how that name came into inception and what your vision is for this great resource.
Well, I was also thinking about Kitchen Table Press, and I was doing research for a book I was writing, and I came across a transcript of an interview with Barbara Smith, and just so many things that she was saying in this interview, it just really touched me, particularly her conversations about taking a particular ownership and a particular stake in our stories. So not just sharing them, but owning them for ourselves and sharing them. Mm-hmm. And so when I looked at the history of Kitchen Table Press and just the push of it to say, no one is publishing Black women and women of color writers and poets. Mm-hmm. Nobody's doing that. Mm-hmm. Let's just do it ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I journal a lot just as a writer, and as I've always kept a diary and a journal growing up. And so I journaled a lot about it. And one of the worries I had was, is it okay to use this name? And so I actually had probably an hour and a half long phone call with Dr. Alexis Pauline Gumbs. Mm-hmm. And I talked to her about my vision and what it was I was trying to do. And, her work is very much centered in that herstory, that legacy, and then very much about how that work that our ancestors started just carries on through us. And so I feel like that conversation in a lot of ways helped me understand that as long as I was being clear about the energy that I was hoping to infuse from that legacy. So if you go to Kitchen Table Literary Arts website, you'll see on our homepage, this is where we got our name from. Mm-hmm. This is the legacy that we're trying to move forward with. We are also supporters of the Barbara Smith Caring Circle, which is a fund put together with artists and activists and writers and academics and regular folk who are just sort of paying forward that gratitude to Barbara Smith and all the work she's done as a pioneer. And so we got a link to that on there. So we see Kitchen Table Literary Arts as an extension of this work today and now. Mm-hmm. And we're not publishers because I very much believe that you do the work that you do well, and then you connect with the people who do the other things that you need done, who do that well. Mm-hmm. And so there are a number of independent presses and a number of organizations that do publishing well. And so our job is to say, well, how can we give Black women and women of color writers the resources, sometimes the instruction and tools? We have creative writing classes. How can we build this community to gather up Black women and women of color writers who might not feel comfortable calling themselves writers, who maybe don't feel like being a writer is something they can be, like they're looking for some sort of permission from the outside world, saying the only permission you need is your own to tell your story and see your book into fruition, your poem into fruition, your screenplay into fruition. How can we help you get your story out into the world the way you see it? And so that's the vision for Kitchen Table Literary Arts, and how we chose the name and how we carry that legacy forward.
When did you start Kitchen Table Literary Arts?
It started in my journal well before we started publicly. So I did a lot of meditation and praying about who was going to help me with this thing, because it's a huge undertaking. But we started in 2014, and I started it on my grandmother's birthday, September 4th. And we'll be 4 years old on Tuesday.
I hear you talk about helping women with creative writing classes. What other things do you all do?
Oh, well, kind of housed in literary arts is trying to just use literature, particularly literature by Black women and women of color writers, to do events, to just bring community together, bring us together. So we have a Year of Toni Morrison that we're doing right now. Each month we use the themes from a Toni Morrison novel. She has 11 novels, so it's going to take us through the year. And we meet up the third Saturday of each month, and we talk about a Toni Morrison novel. You don't have to read the book because we talk about the themes. We draw it back to the work, but we use that literary tradition to have really important conversations that we don't always have in our community, like around sexual abuse and incest and religion and freedom and, all sorts of things. We started last year something we call Sips and Stories, which is a literary happy hour. So we choose a short story by a Black woman writer, a woman of color writer. You read the story and meet for drinks. I think that's the tagline.
I love that. I want to come to Tampa for that.
Come on. So we just, and then it's a short story. Some people even say I just read the story in the parking lot. Is that okay? And it's like, that's perfect. So read the story, meet for drinks. We also have partnerships with foster homes and transitional living spaces to bring creative writing programs to organizations that wouldn't normally get that kind of those kind of outlets, creative outlets for both youth and adults. We partner with a lot of small Black-owned businesses to do. We did a calendar where we featured Black women writer quotes and got a chance to have each month feature a Black business from the community. So we literally sit and have a meeting and say, what's something fun we can do around Black women's literature? And if it works out, it works out. We're doing a sickle cell walk together as an organization. So, we like to be where the people are. So that's how we come up with stuff to do.
Zami Nobla has a monthly book club, and I just love the idea of women, especially queer women, Black queer women, getting together and talking about our writing. Because as I've said before and shared with you, I believe that writing is a receipt of our existence. And if we're not writing, then we're not really here. So I think it's very revolutionary. You're having this organization where you're actually helping people to write and move past this imposter idea, which so many people have.
I get it sometimes. It comes in waves. When we have public programming, it's free and open to the public. Our writers groups and our writers initiatives are specifically for Black women writers and women of color writers. And so I felt it was really important to create a space where you can be authentically yourself in all your ways. Bring your whole self to a writing workshop. What we found is that a lot of the hesitance to claim that title of writer is our preconceived notions about who gets to be a writer. And whether you steep that in whether or not you've been published, or whether or not you've sold a book, whether or not your book has been a New York Times bestseller, whether or not you have a degree in writing. There's all these notions of what makes a writer and who gets to call themselves writer. And while I don't believe that anybody who writes is a writer, because a lot of people write all the time, I think about writing when no one has asked you to. Writing because you feel like if you don't, your world don't make sense. Writing because you have something that's just burning in your chest. Writing because, as Toni Morrison said, there's a book in you, a book that you wish was in the world, and that's the book you're supposed to write. And notice that none of those ideas or definitions have anything to do with nobody's degree, or nobody's publication, or nobody's special permission. That's all within you. And so I see the trajectory of Kitchen Table Literary Arts being this tradition of how can we help writers who have it within them to claim that title and be that, helping them understand that they don't need nobody's permission to tell their story. No one's gonna tell the story like you're gonna tell it. It's yours. It's yours.
Right. So you mentioned previously that you even have to sometimes struggle or make your way through this imposter syndrome. How do you do that personally, and how do you recommend other women who are writing move beyond that if they're in that situation?
Sometimes coming out of it is just a question of letting go. Letting go, getting out of your own way, and reminding yourself that the work you do is yours. The story you tell is yours. How are you an imposter in your own life? You are you. And I have to remind myself of that in my work, because as a writer who's had books published, I get caught up in some of those same trappings I just mentioned. What the reviews look like, what lists are it making? For example, a Return to Arms, through some mystical connection and alignment of stars, ended up in Ebony magazine. And I didn't know. So a friend had sent me a message and said, "Is this your book?" And I was blown away, because I'm like, how did it get there? And then you get this little thrill about what that means. And then it doesn't necessarily mean anything. Like, it wasn't, there's so many different paths to what success is going to look like for you, that being open and letting go of all those preconceived notions of what you think a successful writer looks like, or not to say that one shouldn't have goals for his or her work, but you should definitely just be open to the many paths that go beyond your human understanding of what your work can do and be in the world. And once you start letting go of that and knowing that I have to show up and do the work. I have to write this story. If I don't write it, ain't nobody gonna write it, because it's my story and I need to get it out. And if you're a writer who feels that burning in your chest to tell your story, you just got to write it. There ain't no other way around it. And so once you reconcile that and know that I could not write, right? I can't not write. Right. You know what I'm saying? I can't. It's a part of who I am. It's, and I'm sure many artists feel that same thing. I can't not make music, or I can't not write this poem. Then you don't really have no choice whether you feel like an imposter or not. This is the gift, and use it.
When did you first learn that you were called to the gift of writing?
I used to write a lot as a child. When I was bored, I would write stories. I would tell stories. I used to get in trouble a lot. I was very hard-headed, and I lied a lot as a child, and I would get in trouble. And I would write these long apologetic poems to my mother about being sorry and how much I loved her. And then I would be sent to my room for punishment, and I would just sit in there and write a story. The first story, I wrote it at my grandmother's house because I was bored. It was called Boogie Till You Drop Dead. I think I was like 8. And it was really just about these teenagers who are having a party. And then it quoted the lyrics to Whip Appeal by Babyface for a little while because that song came on at the party. And then they was just dancing until they exploded. My grandmother had showed me that when I was in high school, that she had kept that story. And so I just love it. I've just always loved it. Always loved it. I didn't know that it was a quote unquote gift or that it was going to be my special thing until I was in undergrad. Had a couple extra classes I had to take before I graduated from Marquette with a business degree. And so with the space I had left in my schedule, I took a fiction workshop. I minored in English. In my family, I'm first generation college student, so you're not going to go major in English. You're going to get a degree you can use. So I have a business degree in information technology and human resources, and I minored in English. And so this last little bit of time I had in my schedule, I took a fiction workshop with a Japanese American writer, Kyoko Mori. I'll never forget her. And I took that class, Angela. It was all I cared about.
Wow.
It was all I cared about. To have my professor tell me, this is good. Like, what's your major again? Like, that was a question. Like, you're in the School of Business? Why? And I would just shrug. I had no answer. I thought, I just liked writing. So I remember the week of graduation, I'd had my final advising session with my business advisor. And then I had a meetup with another kind of informal mentor at the time, Dr. Heather Hathaway, who taught in the literature department. I had a sit down with her and we were talking, and I was telling her about that fiction workshop. And I was like, I don't know what to do because I want to do this. And I remember crying a lot and just not feeling like I just didn't know what I was going to do. I took a consulting job, and it was a great job, and my mother was pleased. I met this woman, Bonita Newton, who worked as a reporter. So we started a small writing group, just the two of us. That's how small it was.
Was this in Tampa?
This was in Tampa because the job, the consulting job, the home office moved me down to actually St. Petersburg, which is about 45 minutes south of Tampa.
Okay.
And so I met a friend through the onboarding and training who's like, oh, you moving to Florida? I got a friend down there, Bonita Newton. And so I meet up with Bonita, and we have a writing group, and we're trading stories. And so we would write stories, and then we would trade them, and then we would pick a restaurant and talk about it. So the first time we did that, she said, Sheree, what are you doing? And I was like, what you mean? She's like, what are you doing? I was like, what you mean? She said, you should be doing this. You are a writer. You should be doing this. And I was like, okay, but I didn't know what that meant. Like, I knew that Black women were writers, but it felt like something else. I said, okay, but I still didn't know what that meant. And in thinking about the easiest way to break and change careers, which is ultimately what I was doing, I decided a master's degree in creative writing, an MFA. And so Bonita was like, yes, let's research programs, so on and so forth. So, and I want to keep saying her name. So Bonita got me studying for the GRE, got me looking at programs. We went to New York and looked at NYU. We went to, we were supposed to go to Chicago, but she wasn't able to make it. So I ended up going by myself and had a tour of Columbia College, Chicago, where I ended up going. I came back. I said, Columbia College, that's where I'm going. I was like, I felt something while I was there. This is where I'm going. So the week I quit my job, and I had 2 weeks before I was, about 2 or 3 weeks before I was leaving to go to Chicago, Bonita had a blood clot in her leg that traveled, and she had collapsed at work and passed away. Wow. 25 years old.
Wow.
And every time I think about the opportunity to do the things that I do as a writer, as a Black woman, following my passion, I think about Bonita, and I wonder if part of her mission was to help me do what I'm doing. And so to honor her legacy, I knew that no matter what happened, no matter how many times you tell me no matter how many times you pass on my story or my book or whatever it is, that no, I'm not hearing it. Because there was a whole life involved in getting me where I am. And every stride I make forward, I think about how her friendship changed my life. Just changed my life.
Wow, that's a very
poignant
poignant story. Yeah.
I didn't know I was going to go there.
That's poignant, and thank you so much for sharing.
Man,
with us. And in honor of Bonita and those who have just encouraged you in your writing, why don't we hear some of your work? And you so graciously agreed to do that.
Okay. This is from my last novel, A Return to Arms. The story is of a Black lesbian activist, and she is in a relationship with a closeted Black lesbian activist. And the novel itself is loosely based on the 1996 police murder of Tyron Lewis in St. Petersburg, Florida, which did escalate to riots and calling in the National Guard, and it just really rocked South St. Petersburg. And in writing this novel, which the impetus of which was the Trayvon Martin murder, I started doing research. I was just in such a, I can't even really describe the place I was in. Rage, sadness, exhaustion. And I just started, these characters came to me and started telling me this story, and I started researching, but I was thinking about too my own place in activism in my community, and thinking about sort of how fragmented the fight for Black liberation has been and can be when sexuality enters a conversation. And so the book is very much about Black Lives Matter movement and Black liberation, but also all the intricacies of what it means to be an intersectional person, what it means to be Black and a woman and queer, and where do I fit and where do we fit in these conversations for Black liberation when the definitions kind of put forth by some movements excludes us. The section I'm going to read from the novel is there's a group of activists. So Toya is our main character, and Falami, those are the two Black lesbians, and they are coming back from a rally. A young black teen has been killed, and so they're coming back from a rally in the car with two other people from the movement. The Impala crept through the blaring tail and headlights on McCarthy Avenue and finally made it to I-75 South. Merging into the lighter than expected traffic, it seemed that just a few people must have made the drive from downstate to Evergreen. Falami said most of the people she met had been from Atlanta, Valdosta, Gainesville, and Tallahassee. Fishbone mentioned that he met a few people from New York and a couple from Memphis, but other than that, everyone he met lived in Evergreen or Tallahassee. Kanan, like Toya, was silent. They drove that way for a while, Falami and Fishbone recounting people they had met and organizations they noticed in attendance. They shared a laugh at the expense of the white people handing out their peace bracelets. She elbowed Toya when Fishbone said, "You know, we can't have nothing." Toya forced a smile and returned her attention to the passing cars and farmland blanketed in darkness. "I'm excited to see what our next move is going to be," Falami said. "I have some ideas. I definitely think we should incorporate music. Did you feel the energy once the choir and the band turned up?" At the mention of the choir and the band, Toya stared more intensely out the window. The darkness of the sky and blur of trees made it easy to ignore the uneasiness that churned in her belly. She pressed her head against the window to look up at the stars. "That was fire," Fishbone said. "I felt that shit in my chest." "What about you, Toya?" Falami asked. "Didn't you feel the energy in the rally go from 10 to 1,000 when the music is beside the point?" Kanan said. He had only removed his sunglasses when they got to the car and slid behind the wheel to drive. "It hyped up the mood, but that shit was a distraction. Did you hear what the director was saying? Now that's what got me turned up. That's what got me hype." Kanan sped up and dipped over into the left lane to pass a car. He moved back over to the right lane and settled back in his seat, cruising. Toya stared out the window. The traffic thinned more and more as they got closer to Tampa, and with only 60 more miles to I-275, she looked forward to getting home. She didn't want to talk about her experience with all the others in the car. She needed to talk to Falami alone, wanted to ask her once and for all what she wanted to do. The way the music moved her and the excitement of meeting someone new made Toya realize that she was ready to strike out on her own. She had energy and ideas, but they were being stifled. She wanted Falami to be a part of this renewal, but was also prepared to leave her and rise up behind if the plans demanded it. "Of course," Falami said. "The director is a powerful speaker. We know that. I do think he was a little harsh, though. All that blood talk seemed kind of morbid. Mr. and Mrs. Miles didn't look pleased at all." Kanan chuckled. "Morbid? Fuck morbid. This struggle is about life and death. Ain't no way to talk about it without talking about blood, about death." Falami sighed and sat back. Fishbone looked out the window. Kanan seemed to take the hint that no one was interested in another lecture like the one he treated them to on the way to the rally. He exhaled slowly and sat up to maneuver around a slow-moving car. 2 quick whoops from a police siren woke Toya up. She hadn't realized she'd nodded out. She sat up, Falami and Fishbone following suit. Apparently, all 3 of them had dozed off. The red and blue flashing lights lit into the car. "What did you do?" Fishbone whispered. Kanan looked over at him, then rolled his eyes and shook his head. He pressed the button to roll down his window. When he rested both hands on the steering wheel, he looked straight ahead. The car felt like a gas chamber right before they flipped the switch, a sense of impending doom making the space tight and full and nauseous. No one moved. The officer finally climbed out of the car and walked slowly up to the Impala. He peered into the back seat, his mirrored glasses hanging from the middle of his shirt. He squinted and frowned at Toya and Falami. He walked up to the driver's side window and placed his hand on top of his holster.
As you were reading, I started thinking about how writing has a real gift of capturing our day and age, each day and age from which the writer is working in. And I couldn't help but to think about when we think about these times, certainly the whole idea of driving while Black is so important. And we need art that helps us think about that. So that's a beautiful way of just capturing kind of where we are now. And as we talked about this whole idea of writing as a way of a receipt of our existence, being able to, I think, write and put us in that place is so important. How did you come to the title? That's a question I always ask writers. How did you get the title for the book?
The title comes from, it's a play. I knew the story that I wanted to tell, but I wasn't sure of the structure. And so I had read A Farewell to Arms, and the structure of it is it's separated into books, and the story starts with war and it evolves into a love story. A Return to Arms begins with a love story. And so the story, you know, it's about Toya and Falami finding their identity and standing in it, and what that means. What are they willing to give up and compromise on in order to do the work that they feel they need to do for the community? And it evolves from this really intimate personal story into violence, and rage and anger, which is a lot of what I was feeling when I was writing the novel. And it's interesting that you pick up on this concept of point of view and what it feels like. I knew I needed to write this book when I was at the gym. We were right in the thick of the Trayvon Martin trial. I was at the gym and there was a news segment of George Zimmerman taking a reporter through his actions of that evening. He's describing how, I first saw him there. And so I drove and I came back around this way. And then I saw him walking that way. And so I rolled past him slow. And then I came around another corner. And then I saw him dart between these two places. So that's when I parked here and I called 911. And then I decided to follow him on foot. And so while he's telling that story, I began to be moved by point of view and what point of view does. And so I knew that part of why so many of us were hurting during this trial and with this story is that we as Black people are the only people putting ourselves in Trayvon's point of view. And Trayvon's point of view is, I'm walking down the street. I see a car roll past slow. I don't know if that car is following me or not, but that feels creepy, but I'm gonna keep walking. Car comes around again. That's that same car. I don't know. I'm not feeling good about this. He calls his girlfriend. He's talking to her. He's telling her, I think someone's following me. I think it's a white man following me. He decides to cut. How many times, just even as a Black woman, if you've had fear that someone is following you, so you take a different way or maybe fake go into a store or something, right.
Right.
This boy is trying to survive. He's being stalked. And so I was just thinking about how frightened he must have been. He had to have been terrified, absolutely terrified. And so I was thinking about that fear and how much we hold that fear in so many different situations. That's another reason I center Black queerness in most of my work, spaces where you might have felt unsafe as a woman. Places where you felt unsafe as a Black queer woman, whether that's the company around you or just the way the conversation turns. That fear is real, and it's all a aspect of point of view.
Queer subjectivity is so important, and I know some people have a great sense of fear about writing from their own perspective as a queer person. Has that ever been something that you have thought about? You're making this great work and you're talking about being queer and being Black. Has there ever been any time when you've said, maybe I shouldn't write this because people may not receive it well, or it just may not be really appreciated?
Yes, I felt like that. I have. I felt like that with this novel, with A Return to Arms, particularly because some of the things that the characters are dealing with are, they come from our own people, sadly. And I was drawing from experiences where I've come together with community to do some activist work, or whether that's direct action or even just a community meeting. Like, let's talk about what's going on in a community and how we can come together. And then sort of being hurt by the inclusion of queer people as being part of, the white man's plan of Black genocide. And so it's like 1 minute we're talking about generational poverty, and we're talking about being proud of ourselves as Black people and supporting our own. And then it's like, we also got to talk about getting back to the traditional African family of Black woman and Black man. And, that's what's really hurting our community. And so now suddenly a place where I was excited to see where I can lend my energies and my talents, I'm suddenly aligned with the enemy. And that hurts. the oppression we feel comes from all sides. And so to not hold space for the fact that some of the very Black people that we're fighting for us to be free, this Black liberation, it includes your Black queer brothers and sisters, period. It includes us. So when I was writing this book in particular, I was nervous about bringing that story to the fore. And so this book is very much about showing up as your whole self and knowing that some people ain't going to appreciate that. My first novel dealt a lot with alcoholism. The work I'm doing now is nonfiction, and I'm actually calling out and naming some of my own challenges with alcohol, which was difficult to do. So it was easier to talk about it in this novel. But even then, looking at a character or telling a particular story and telling all of it. Don't waste your time. Tell it. But that's a very vulnerable place to be. And I mean, it takes a lot of courage and making space for all of it, not just the good parts or the fun parts or the funny parts, but the sad parts and the parts where you're angry, the parts where you're ashamed, the parts where you're sorry and need forgiveness. Like, we need space for all of that.
I can't help but to go back to that very profound part of our conversation where you talked about George Zimmerman and so many people being unable to understand Trayvon Martin's perspective. Mm-hmm. Because what you just said reminded me of how you can have Black folks in a room and not being empathetic or understanding the perspective of those in the room who are queer, mm-hmm. or those in the room with disabilities, mm-hmm. or those in the room who are immigrants.
Absolutely.
And so I think this whole aspect of intersectionality is so important, because it really puts us in a place of being able to, and forces some people to be able to really understand the human condition. Mm-hmm. And I think that will lead us to more places of compassion.
Oh, yes.
And peace and justice.
Yes.
So that's a very profound aspect of your work that I love.
Thank you.
What's the name of your first book?
Let the Lover Be.
And what's that about?
The quick blurb is, it's the story of a functional alcoholic who travels to New Orleans to stop an ex-lover's wedding.
Wow.
That's the premise.
Put that on the reading list.
That's the premise. And the story is, I think in many ways it's about, trying to get to the core of things, which is something that we don't always do well, is get to the core of things.
What writers have influenced you to develop your style and the way in which you're really able to give a very unique perspective?
I don't even know if I have a style yet. I don't feel like I've been writing long enough to have a style. I've tried things on the page. Mm-hmm. I like to see if they work. And if they don't, I like to try more stuff on the page. So I don't know that I got a style just yet. Toni Morrison's ability to weave in and out of point of view, for example, is something that I admire. I can't do that. I've tried. I don't feel like it's working, but I'm a keep at it. But James Baldwin's truth telling and his characters and the way he handles anger and shame and those kind of quote unquote ugly emotions that we don't like to face. I really appreciate the way he does that in his work. Audre Lorde, just for being deliberate in the things that she wants to say. I always feel like she's telling you exactly what she wants you to think about. And she's asking the exact questions that she has of herself and the reader and the world. And that's something that pushes me to the page to try to figure those things out, find my way to those questions and those expectations of, like, what do I expect of myself when I get to the page, but also what do I expect of the people who are reading the work, and what do I expect of the world from this work? And then understanding that expectation is, sometimes a fool's path, because you never know what's going to come out of what you put on the page. I've had people notice things in some of my work that I didn't see or never occurred to me. I'm also a huge fan of Tananarive. I've fallen in love with Nalo Hopkinson and just her imagination. And I'm trying to push myself to write new things and write in new ways. And I just feel like writing is exploratory. For my current work, which is nonfiction, and it's the most difficult work of my life, and it's the scariest work of my life, I'm finding comfort in other writers who take themselves to task and strip themselves bare and tell the things they don't want to tell because they gotta be told. And so I've been reading Kiese Layman. I've been reading Roxane Gay. I've been reading Megan Stilstra. I've just been reading a lot of personal essays. Samantha Irby, just kind of reading the work of people who are opening themselves up and putting themselves splayed on the page.
The curious side of me wants to ask and will ask, why is this current work so scary, if you can tell us, or is it ready to be divulged?
My current work is, I'm calling it a essay memoir mixtape. And I am exploring my challenges with alcohol and my father's challenges with alcohol and our family history and how much in Black families, or just maybe families the world over, how much we lie to each other and lie to ourselves and make excuses and tell lopsided stories. And so my father, 73, and he's been sober 6 years, and our relationship has always been just very tumultuous. In learning more about him, I'm learning more about myself. I'm hearing stories that I thought I knew, stories my mama told me, stories my grandmama told me about my father or about our family. And so I'm hearing his version for the first time. And his version is not to be dismissed. His version is another point of view that sadly I hadn't considered until now. And when I tell you that it is an exercise in understanding what forgiveness really is, and understanding what love really is, and understanding how pain and love and like how messy everything really is, and how do we reckon with that mess? How do we reckon with that mess? How do we hold spaces for that kind of ambivalent quality of love, right? And so that's what I'm wrestling with. And that's why it's hard, because, once you start hearing different perspectives on a story you thought you knew, other things start coming to light about other people and instances of discord and even instances of harmony that weren't what you thought they were. How does that contribute to who I am in the world now and who I want to be tomorrow? And that's why it's felt so heavy, because all of that is steeped in the past and those stories. But I'm feeling like I'm at a place in my life now where I'm ready to understand who I am and what I'm here to do, so that I can do it well and fully and not have regrets. That's what I'm working on.
Wow. Do you have a working title for it?
I'm toying around with the best I know, because that's just something that my dad always said.
Wow.
If you call my dad ain't nothing but a drunk, he'd be like, I'm the best I know. or you're a hardworking. I mean, he is such a hardworking man, you know, is like, hey, I'm the best I know. But then he'd sometimes say, you the best I know. So, wow. So I'm kind of playing with that. But I have the first completed essay from the collection is called Bars, and it'll be published in Fourth Genre magazine this fall. And it is I guess a lyric essay is the fancy word for it, about all the bars that I've been to in my life, starting with the first bar my dad ever took me to, Winter's Circle in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, all the way through coming out, being closeted and coming out, and all the way up till I think the last bar is about 4 years ago. Me and my dad again. So I'm excited for that. And I'm excited for the challenge of this work. It's hard. It's been really difficult. And I know that that's why I need to be doing it.
Yeah, that's powerful. And I love the title, The Best I Know, because of what you said, basically about the stories that you know and the stories you've been told. And maybe a sense of really getting the true picture is getting all of those stories and getting the best of them and trying to make some sense of it. That's profound.
I didn't think of it that way, but
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
But I think that's what art does. I think that you put something out in the world and then people receive it and they're able to reflect on it. I think that's what great art does. You can say something, I hear it, and then I respond to it in some way because of what it does to me.
Yes.
And so I have writers that I love because of that work. I have musicians because of that work and how they can pull something out of me. What's the future for kitchen table literary arts? What's your vision?
Vision. We are really taking our passion for bringing creative writing resources, tools, and classes to places and to Black women and women of color writers who might not get the kind of access and opportunity. So we are fully embracing technology and the ways that technology can bring us to places that we might not necessarily be able to go to physically. So we're looking to really bolster our online classes. We are developing coursework so that with sort of a alternative MFA aesthetic in mind. Definitely thinking about how cost prohibitive getting an advanced degree can be, how at its core the advanced degree can help you professionally if you're looking to get into academia, for example. But if you are getting an MFA is by no means guaranteed publication or guaranteed writer success. So offering opportunities to know that that's not the only way. And then with it having such a strong online component, being able to be able to take a creative writing class at your leisure on your schedule, having that access and knowing that the course itself, I was, jokingly calling it the FUBU of creative writing, is for us, by us. The classes are designed by Black women writers and women of color writers, and they're for Black women writers and women of color writers. And so you're going to see the coursework reflected in that. You're going to see the discussions reflected in that. So that's something, that's one of our largest initiatives right now, is really bolstering that program and making it widely available. We are also in kind of partnership mode. So we're looking for ways to partner with like-minded organizations on different initiatives surrounding not just creative writing, but those intersections of storytelling, and whether that be social justice, storytelling, and archiving, like this podcast is an example of, just trying to help stand in the gaps of places to create the links between our communities to make sure that people know that we're out here and that we're creating and then holding space for you. So that's what's next.
How can people contact you?
I am on Facebook. I am on Instagram. And I am occasionally on Twitter. Sheree L. Greer is my handle for everything. I have my website is shereelgreer.com. Kitchen Table Literary Arts. We are at kitchen-table.org. We also have a Facebook page, and we are on Instagram and Tumblr and Twitter. And sign up for our newsletter. That's a way to kind of stay plugged in. And then if you are a Black woman writer, woman of color writer, if you go to our website, kitchen-table.org, you can sign up to be a part of our online writing community. It's sort of like a Facebook for Black women and women of color writers. There's writing prompts. There's a calendar of events. Decatur Book Festival was listed. Outright Festival, like we keep the calendar updated with writerly events. We also share book recommendations. There's just places to have discussions about craft. And then if you are a member of the community, you get discounts on classes as they become available. So kitchen-table.org.
Sheree Greer, I can't begin to tell you how much I enjoyed spending time with you today.
Thank you so much. I did too. This was very nice.
Thank you for being part of our Black lesbian history.
Thank you.
I hope you've enjoyed our interview with Sheree Greer. We were out of our home studio today and meeting up with her while she was here in Atlanta for the Decatur Book Festival. I leave our time today just being very grateful for her vulnerability and her generosity in sharing her story and her work. And I hope that you leave too with some sense of what it means to be grateful for those who have invested in our art, who have made it possible for us to be who we are. Maybe you have a story you want to write or something that needs to be told. I just want to encourage you today, with the best that you know, to go out and to make a difference, to be the writer, the speaker, the musician, the artist, the person you are, the creative soul that you are, to move in this world and to be all that you can be. Make the investment worth the time. If you have any comments or feedback you want to give us, please feel free to email me at podcast@zaminobla.org. And as always, thanks for giving us your listening ear. And until next time, have a sweet one.